Hello and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. The South Caucasus is entering an increasingly tense and decisive political period. Just weeks before Armenia's parliamentary elections, geopolitical pressure around the region is intensifying. Moscow is openly warning Yerevan against deeper integration with the European Union, while concerns continue to grow over Russia's declining influence in Armenia and the wider region. Inside Armenia itself, the peace agenda and the future of relations with Azerbaijan have become central issues of election campaign, alongside debates over the country's strategic direction and growing external involvement in the South Caucasus. Questions remain over the role of the European monitoring mission, France's increasing activity in Armenia, and whether outside powers are helping stabilize the region or deepening geopolitical competition. Joining me now is Gary Cartwright, publishing editor of EU Today in Brussels, Belgium. Hello, Gary, and thank you so much for joining Inside Politics.
Hello.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Armenia's parliamentary elections are taking place amid growing geopolitical tensions and increasing competition between external actors in the region. How would you describe the broader strategic atmosphere currently forming around the South Caucasus, particularly in Europe?
Well, I would say, I'd begin by saying that actually the recent summit, the EU-Armenia summit, was it registered zero on the Richter scale here in Brussels. We were aware that it was happening, but really there was no news coming back. It appeared to be a bit of a non-event from Brussels' perspective. Having said that, this was coming at a very important time. We know that there are a lot of tensions in the region. And I think that the European Union may contribute to those tensions by even entering the debate on providing security guarantees for Armenia. Russia already does that, and Russia is a jealous nation. It doesn't like other people interfering in its backyard. And I think that the Armenians are possibly creating a problem for themselves. And why would they need Europe when Russia already provides those security guarantees? Economically, I think that this was a more important summit for Europe because Europe is always looking for new markets. But again, I see a slight risk there because if you're expanding your economic footprint in a country, then you are becoming a more important player. Again, treading on Russia's toes, I would argue. Europe also, it sees business as a means of expanding its reach. So there's always a little bit of politics, or a lot of politics behind the economics as well. Again, that's three things I've mentioned that will probably be upsetting Russia.
Well, that's absolutely. It's more about politics, but also economy here can prevail. And just recently on May 9, Vladimir Putin made it clear that Armenia may eventually face a strategic choice between deeper European integration and remaining within the Russian-led Eurasian space. What does this reveal about Moscow's remaining influence over Yerevan, and how concerned is Russia about gradually losing its strategic position in Armenia?
It would be very concerned, very concerned. Let's think, go back recent events in Moldova, for example, and previously we could talk about Serbia. Russia did not like the increasing influence that Europe and the West in general had over those countries.
Well, you mentioned Moldova, but there's also a very important episode happened just some days before. President Vladimir Putin also warned about the possible Ukrainization of Armenia, a term increasingly used in Russian strategic rhetoric to describe rising Western influence, deep internal polarization, and growing geopolitical confrontation around a neighboring state. What exactly does this concept mean in the Russian political mindset, and to what extent could such a scenario realistically emerge in Armenia under current regional conditions?
I think that Putin militarily is overstretched at the moment. This would not be a good time for him to make any kind of incursion or any kind of actions in Armenia. And I think he's stretched militarily, politically, and possibly emotionally as well. He doesn't look very well these days. I think that Europe is not deliberately stirring the pot or fanning the flames. It has no ill intent towards Russia in context of Russia's relations with Armenia. It's just another conference. I think that maybe Russia will see more into it, read more into it than was really there. It was really just a talking shop, and I don't consider it to be of any great geopolitical importance. I would not say that there is a great feeling, a desire to embrace Armenia more closely in Europe. I would argue that the only real friend that Armenia has in the EU is France. I think that if Putin is worried, he's probably worried about nothing.
Now we are more interested in the upcoming weeks and the situation which will take place before the parliamentary elections in Armenia. And according to some reports, Moscow may be less interested in removing Nikol Pashinyan entirely than in limiting his political maneuverability and weakening his position ahead of the elections. What forms could such indirect or asymmetric pressure take, from information campaigns to influence over political and security narratives? And more important, how dangerous could this become for the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process and regional stability?
Concerning the latter point, Russia has traditionally used conflict as a catalyst for progress. In fact, I did not was it Lenin who first came out with that? Conflict is the catalyst for progress. So I don't think he would shy away from any military action. I don't think he would. I don't think that he would be fearing a response from the West. As I say, France is Armenia's only real friend. And at the moment, militarily and geopolitically, the West is very stretched. But Putin could create a crisis.
What kind of, if more in details, like what can be done within the next weeks?
It could be militarily, it could be an overthrow of a government. These things, they sound to us, almost it's the 21st century. We shouldn't be even talking about these things. But Putin's mindset is not so much 21st century as it is in Russian insecurity. I've always considered Russian people to be insecure. Putin very much so. He's also paranoid. I think he sees threats where there are no threats. I hope that I'm wrong, but I would suspect that that is the kind of tactic he would revert to if he felt that his position was threatened, if he felt that he needed to send shockwaves through the region. Yeah, a military incursion would not be impossible. Would he try to create a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan? That I can't answer because I don't know the geopolitics of the area that well. But by proxy, again, it's very much a Russian strategy. So yes, I think that there could be an incursion of some sort.
But
it could be political, it could be overthrow of the regime, of course.
On the other side, Gary, Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, increasingly presents the election campaign as a choice between peace and renewed confrontation. Does this indicate that normalization with Azerbaijan has now become one of the central issues in Armenia's domestic political struggle?
I would say yes, because look, this is a conflict. Karabakh is a conflict that went on for a very long time, and I would argue that was Putin's project. He likes these frozen conflicts. There were several of them during his reign, but I don't think either the Armenian people or the Azeri people would want to renew that conflict. I think Putin would struggle to reignite that.
Another very important element, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan once again argued that Karabakh was never internationally recognized as part of Armenia and described the movement launched in 1988 as a strategic mistake with serious consequences for Armenian statehood. At the same time, President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, has warned against revanchist forces in Armenia, seeking renewed confrontation with Azerbaijan. So, do these statements indicate that despite continuing differences, both Baku and Yerevan increasingly understand that the future of the region must be built around a new political reality after the conflict?
I'm sure that after years of conflict, there is no taste in either of the two countries for a renewal. I think that the Armenian people, my perception is that they are maybe not as vocal. Maybe civil society is not as vocal as it is in Azerbaijan, but that's just my perception. But I really feel that neither country has any taste for reigniting that conflict.
One of the key elements in the debates is the EU monitoring mission along the Armenia-Azerbaijani border, which is expected to conclude once a peace treaty is ratified. Yet, the broader EU partnership presence inside Armenia appears likely to remain in place. From a European perspective, how should this deeper EU-Armenia engagement be understood? As a normal partnership process, or do you also understand why Azerbaijan may view certain elements of it with a caution from a regional security standpoint?
Concerning individual elements, I don't have the depth of knowledge there. I think the important thing to understand is perceptions, how events are perceived. If Russia had had a conference with, let us say, Cyprus, for example, this would not cause any problems in Europe. It would not cause any problems in the UK, which has a strong presence there. It would be perceived as a conference. I think that Putin sees everything, and maybe he's paranoid. I feel he may be paranoid. Maybe he sees everything as a threat. And he sees it possibly not as a threat to Russian interests, so much as to his own interests, to how he is perceived in the world. He wants to be perceived as a strong man, a strong leader, on top of everything. Everybody's afraid of him. He's unpredictable. This is the persona he wants to project to the world, and I think he's very protective of that persona.
But now, even before answering my first question, you mentioned about the interests Russia still has in Armenia and European Union interests in Armenia, which should not be overlapping, let's say, not to lead to any kind of confrontations in the future. And now talking about this EU mission, which is now monitoring along the Armenia-Azerbaijan border, two countries, Azerbaijan and Armenia, are having quite normal relations now, almost 9 months without any conflict and confrontations. Do we really need this monitoring mission in Armenia in case of EU is willing to support and secure Armenia from the neighboring countries, and if even in case of confrontation with Russia? So why do we need this mission in the region?
I would argue actually for a UN peacekeeping mission. Why? Because, of course, Russia is a UN Security Council member, so Russia would feel a much greater sense of ownership over the situation than is the case with the EU. I could understand, if I'm coming from Putin's perspective, I could understand why he would be unhappy with this. It could always be used as an excuse for a confrontation. I think that a UN peacekeeping mission would be a much better idea. We know from past experience, for example, I'll give the experience of Cyprus. I actually served on the Green Line in Cyprus many years ago with the UN. It's been a very, very great success. It works. I think that's the model we should go with, and I think that the UN should be there, not the EU.
This mission, the EU mission in Armenia, is often viewed as a mechanism backed by Paris because in the beginning it was initiated and supported by France, specifically by the President Emmanuel Macron. If this mission encourages revanchism sentiments in Yerevan, what preventive steps does Azerbaijan reserve the right to take to ensure regional security is not compromised by outside observers?
That's a very tough question to answer. Obviously, Azerbaijan must retain the right to close its border as it wishes, close its borders if necessary, as should Armenia, of course. But again, I'm convinced that neither side wants to see any hostilities again. This was a very long and bloody conflict, which was out of control. I'm coming from my own perspective, how I saw it, out of control of either Azerbaijan or Armenia. It was Putin who was switching it on, switching it off, switching it on, switching it off. That is why I think we need to try to see everything from his perspective. And as I said, an EU force is a provocation. He would see it as a provocation. I would have thought that possibly even the European Commission or the European External Action Service would have kind of realised this and questioned, is this a good idea? No. If it works, yeah, stick with it. And the UN model works.
Gary, another important element, it was not Putin, it was European Parliament who adopted a resolution against Azerbaijan. If I'm not mistaken, it was 14 resolutions passed by European Parliament since 2021, since the time when the war between two countries was over. So what can you tell us about the policy of European institutions, some of them, particularly European Parliament, where such kind of resolutions against peace process in the region are being passed in the current time when the peace process, peace agenda are underway between Baku and Yerevan?
The European Parliament, in my experience, tended to always come down more on the side of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has many friends. Armenia, as I said, only has the one. It has France. Again, that kind of reinforces, I think, my sort of argument or my suggestion that having an EU mission in place is not a good idea. How would Putin see this? This is the question we need to be asking. We are dealing with a person who's unpredictable and who can act very, very violently when provoked. Even against his own people, let alone other countries that he might perceive as enemy. I think he is neurotic. I think he sees everything as a potential threat.
Gary, I do remember we had quite a good interview with you a couple of years ago and even later on about the role of and influence of certain Armenian diaspora networks and lobbying groups within European political institutions, particularly in the European Parliament, arguing that these sometimes contribute to one-sided narratives and growing mistrust between Baku and parts of the European political establishment. From a European perspective, how significant is the role of diaspora and lobbying in shaping discussions on the South Caucasus inside EU institutions today? And could this complicate the EU's ability to act as a balanced actor in the region?
Such activities are very important. And I have to tell you that the Armenian lobby, they were presenting their case through two very intertwined slightly, but two distinctly different lobbying groups. It was very professional, I have to say. There was, everything was presented to give the impression of balanced arguments, but always coming down, finishing up in favour of Armenian interests. Those activities are still going on. But it's a little bit lower key now because there's not the urgency that there was from the Armenian sector. We did have a little bit of fun at EU Today with them by drawing attention to the fact that there were certain individuals who were also involved in organised crime activities here in Belgium, actually. And yeah, I know we caused a bit of a stir with that, which I always enjoy doing. But yes, the Armenian lobby in the European Parliament is very, very professional.
And they have due contacts, because recently, probably you also know this story, renewed attention has been drawn to controversial remarks and alleged private communication involving former ICC prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo, including claims about close coordination with certain European political figures on the narratives related to Azerbaijan and Armenia. Such episodes reinforce perceptions of political bias inside parts of the European establishments, particularly regarding the European Parliament and some former EU officials. He mentioned, let's say, his close contacts with Mr. Borrell. How damaging are such controversies for the credibility of the European institutions in the South Caucasus?
Very damaging. And that which you were speaking about, that period was very, very interesting for everybody. Yes, there were a number of politicians and recently not elected politicians who were heavily influenced, shall we say, by this Armenian lobby. This actually was a precursor to a bit of a crackdown in the institutions, particularly the Parliament. And there have been, I know the case of somebody now who's possibly looking at a very significant jail sentence as a result of these lobbying activities. I don't use the word bribery because that would, well, maybe I should. There were a lot of incentives given to MEPs. It was a very bad period, actually, in the Parliament's history. It's sort of, it would always be going on in the background, and I could name people, politicians and former politicians, who we knew were for sale. And, well, it kind of caught up with them. And when it caught up with them, it really woke up the other ones, the overwhelming majority who are completely honest, completely straight, and cannot be bought. I was glad that this happened. Because it was poisoning in Europe, and Armenia is not the only guilty party there. Russia as well, certainly, and also non-state actors, you know, commercial actors, etc., were buying influence. They were buying access, and it was really corrupting the democratic process. So I'm pleased to say that that is now, I think, under control. However, I will tell you that, interestingly, a hotel has opened a few years ago outside Brussels, and it's a Chinese-run hotel, and it is openly courting politicians who are invited to this very beautiful restaurant there, and such other incentives. We can only speculate. So it may be that the problem has moved to a new location, but at least we can say that it's no longer actually happening in the offices of the European Parliament, because it was.
Unfortunately, time to time, we can hear that it affects the works of the European Parliament, as again the case with Luis Moreno Ocampo, which was widely shown on the screen, and it's happened just recently. Let's hope that the situation will be stabilized and nothing can interfere and affect the peace process between two countries in the region of the South Caucasus. Gary, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining our program.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Well, the military status quo that defined the region for decades has collapsed, and a completely new geopolitical environment is emerging, one where regional leadership, connectivity, sovereignty and security are being redefined in real time. For Azerbaijan, the message remains consistent. Peace must be based on recognition of territorial integrity, the rejection of revanchism, and the acceptance of the new regional realities created after the war. But the broader question remains unresolved. Will Armenia fully adapt to this new reality and pursue a stable peace agenda? Or will external geopolitical competition once again transform the region into a space of confrontation between larger powers? That is all for this edition of Inside Politics. Stay with us on A News and see you next time.